It's the morning drive.
Good morning, and welcome to the Morning Drive. I'm your host, Brooks Fiesinger of brooksfiesinger.com and MillionaireWho.com, where we help you save large wallet, secure your future, and succeed in entrepreneurship finance. All right, so I was thinking about this today, and I figured I had to take a moment to reach out and have this little conversation here. So I've been dealing with something in my personal life called white stress. And I don't know if you've heard of white stress before, but in general, the idea of white stress is when you've got so much stuff going on in the background that you worry about it constantly, even if you don't realize you're worrying about it, and that therefore affects your day-to-day activities and your overall stress level. That's kind of the white stress. So one of the places you hear a lot about this is people who carry firearms, whether they're a police officer or a military personnel or whoever it ends up being. Anyone who carries like a firearm, they're often recognized as having white stress. The reason why they have white stress is because they've always got to be on high alert. And because they're always on high alert, they're always thinking that somebody, that they might have to use their firearm, or they might have to save somebody, or they might have to do something. And some people who do that say, oh, it's good to be always aware of your surroundings. And it's certainly good to be aware of your surroundings, but there's a psychological condition that's discussed, white stress, which really is about how people who do that are overall experiencing higher stress levels because they are constantly on guard, constantly worrying, constantly paying attention to that. What I'm trying to talk about for a minute is financial white stress. And financial white stress affects people big time who are in that I'm having trouble paying my bills, or I have creditors coming after me, or I have a financial concern situation. And so what will happen to these people in a financial white stress, what will happen is there's not necessarily a problem that you can deal with this second, but in general, it's that paycheck to paycheck mentality of, I'm worrying about paying my bill. I'm worried about having enough money in my account for when my car payment comes out. I'm worried about having enough money in there to cover my mortgage. I'm worried about having enough money to pay for this. It's that constant grinding worry. Now, I'm going to be honest for a minute. It has been a long time since I have had that kind of worry, and because of that, I kind of forgot how impactful it is. I forgot how impactful it can be to your work, how impactful it can be to your day-to-day activities, how impactful it can be to your family. Living with a constant fear, constant stress is debilitating. And if you've been in that situation your entire life, you don't realize how relieving it is not to have that stress level, right? So I'm going to talk about, to be honest for a minute, I have several layers of security, right? I've got kind of my first wall, my second wall, my third wall, and then my house, per se. And frankly, even though I don't have any actual security risks, I mean, I've got so many layers of security. I've got my emergency funds, I've got my second emergency funds, I've got my liquidable asset. I've got plenty of layers, so I don't actually have any problems. But I found myself worrying about that first layer of security. And I'm worrying about the first layer of security because of some things that are going on in life that have caused issues. Had some additional high health expenses, had some revenue shortfalls with some certain businesses, had actually, this doesn't sound like it should be a cost, but had amazing opportunities that I really knew I needed to take advantage of, but would cost money and did cost money. And these kind of things all play together to all of a sudden put me in a situation where I'm looking at my bank account, every day saying, shoot, I need to manage my cash flows and make sure I've got enough cash sitting here to cover the outflows, right? Now, in general, that shouldn't be a big deal. That's what we should all be generally aware of that. But my buffer my furthermost buffer had gotten encroached on so far that I didn't realize how much stress it was causing me on a day-to-day basis. And it was actually causing me problems, right? So I didn't realize at first it was causing problems. It was keeping me from doing things I would normally do. It was, you probably heard of that concept of, worrying so much about a few pennies that you lose the dollars, that kind of concept. And that's what I was doing. I was, spending an hour to sell something for $100 instead of spending an hour to earn $1,000, right? I mean, it's that mentality. And you shouldn't do that, but you get so caught up with this white stress. This white stress affects you so much, you cannot get away from it. And the reason I bring this up is because it really just reminded me of that problem. And that problem affects millions and millions of people in this country every day. That white stress of, what if I don't have enough money to pay my bill? How am I supposed to cover my family? How can I take advantage of that opportunity if I don't have enough money to pay for food? Or if I don't have, constantly in fear of having enough money is going to debilitate you. And I was working on a project recently that had me talking to a number of wealthy individuals who were really successful, self-made individuals, right? And it's interesting because a lot of these people I was talking to, a lot of them, a whole lot of them, if not almost all of them, and there's a few exceptions, but have the mentality of not having the high debt load. And on paper, you can sit there and say, okay, on paper, take out as much debt as you can as long as you have coverage, right? If I can get out a loan at 5%, but I can make 8% of my money, then do that every day. And there is some truth to that from a financial standpoint. There's some truth to that from a, statistical and analytical standpoint. And I'm not disagreeing. There's definitely a place for it. But if you push too far and you don't leave yourself enough of a buffer, then you create this massive white stress situation. And for me, I almost laugh about it because it's silly in some ways. Like, I have no financial real concerns. I've got it taken care of. Everything I've done, I've put myself in a better situation, and yet it's this white stress that is causing me issues every single day. So even if you have things under control in general, that doesn't mean you can't be faced with these financial white stress situations if you don't have enough active buffer and you try to over leverage and you try to put yourself in these kind of situations. And then you've got to step back, and it's almost like going back to square one again, right? It's almost like going back to where you started, where you're sitting there and saying, you're almost saying, how do I get rid of this debt? How do I increase my revenues? How do I get myself back in a situation where I have more of a buffer? And it's interesting because a lot of times we all like to think, and a lot of the talking heads say the same things, but a lot of people are like, once you get to that point where you have money, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And unfortunately, that's not true because it's always a management project. And I would much rather be in the situation that I'm in right now than the situation where I didn't have those 3 levels of security, where I actually was worried about feeding my family. I don't want to be in that situation ever again, and I'm nowhere close. But as you get yourself beyond that, you set up these walls and these layers of security. And you're going to have time where those layers can be threatened. And when those layers are threatened, that can unfortunately continue to cause you the same white stress you had before. Now, the good news is, in many ways, it can be a reminder. And it can be a reminder of how much better things are today and how far you've come. And if you see it occasionally as that kind of reminder, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's wonderful to remember how that feeling can be of not being in a good financial situation, because it helps you appreciate being in a good financial situation, right? There's no question about that. That remembering how good your situation is now and how far you've come is positive. When we're in a situation for a long time, we forget about how we felt before, and the white stress can be a great reminder about how you used to feel. And that's good. But at the same time, you can't stay there, right? Because it's impacting everything. It's impacting your long-term health, your physical health, your financial health, your work effort. It impacts everything. And so you really need to do whatever you can to get back out of that white stress situation. And so if you've been experiencing white stress your entire life, first of all, the reason why other people are running circles around you is because they've gotten rid of that white stress. And without that white stress, it leaves you more mental capacity to worry about the big things, to worry about the things that matter. You can give up the pennies in search of the dollars. And that's powerful, and that's very important from a financial standpoint, right? That's what we all need to be working on. We don't want to be making those short-term decisions that ultimately aren't worthwhile. So, if that's the experience you've had your entire life, you don't know any better, you want to get out of it, But once you get out of it, it's possible you can have times in your life where that white stress comes and hits you again. And you might not realize it at first because everything seems fine, and then all of a sudden it's going to sneak up on you, and you finally realize, like, gosh, I am having issues. I'm having negative consequences in my life because of the layers and levels of white stress that I'm dealing with a day in and day out. And when you get that situation where you realize that you've got, the white stress and that you've got to do something about it, then it's in some ways back to square one. Not totally back to square one, but you've got to step back and sit there and say, okay, so how am I going to get from where I am right now back to the position that I was before, back to the position where I'm not dealing with this white stress situation? Now, frankly, that can actually become a bigger problem. So one of the things you might do is you might say, hey, I lost my job, or my spouse lost their job, or something like that happened. And so your first gut might be, okay, well, I'm going to go leverage everything I have and start a business. Okay. There's some validity to that concept. Starting a business can be a wonderful thing. But a lot of times when you leverage everything you have, or seemingly everything you have, then you've put yourself in a situation now where you are in even higher levels of constant fear. You don't know where that money is going to come from to pay your bills. You don't know how things are going to work. And on paper, you do the math in advance. You're like, hey, I was making, $3,000 a month before. Now with this new business, I'll be making $4,000 a month. Life is great. And then you buy that business, you put everything on the line, you put 25% down, you get a big old bank loan, you've got this $2,000 a month payment coming out of it to cover that bank loan, and you need a new roof on a building, or a machine breaks down, or an employee quits, or you get in a car accident. Something happens, and then all of a sudden you realize that this castle you built was really built on sand, and it wasn't built on rock. And this business, or this investment, I mean, I've seen people do it with buying cash flow by buying high yield dividend stocks, stuff like that, and then they cut the dividend, right? So there's so many of these type of things that people get into, or the stock market crashes, where they think that this could be the answer to all their problems, and then they discover afterwards that it wasn't an answer to the problems, and in fact, they're now in a rougher space than they were before, and they now not only don't have the original cash, but now they don't have even the second layer buffer, the third layer buffer, and now they really are in dire constraints. And that's difficult because they realize then, or you realize, that you thought you were doing so well and it wasn't as secure as you thought. And it brings back this white stress. So, I want to bring that up just to remind you that you're never going to be fully away from it for short periods of time, but you want to make sure you remember how powerful that white stress can be, how debilitating it can be, and make sure you don't put yourself in a situation in life where that white stress continues to steal dollars from your pocket because you're so worried about those pennies. Once again, it's going to happen to everybody occasionally, but me, I'm thankful that it's a short-term thing, and now you can sit here and say, I can sell this, or I can move this, or I can do this, and it's done, right? Here's my plan to be out of this situation in 3 months, which is a lot better than if you have no layers of security, and then your white stress is, knocking on your door of your house. Because when you're in that situation, you've got to build up those layers of security. That's what often takes years. You're going to pay off your debt, and then you're going to, start building your emergency funds, and you're going to, then build your businesses and stuff like that to generate cash flow. So you're not so dependent on a single job. All that kind of stuff takes a long time. It can take 3, 5, 10 years. Fortunately, when you hit white stress later, unless you do something stupid, then you can often get out of that white stress situation in a matter of weeks or months. But sometimes you forget that you're falling into that world where that white stress is having such a big impact on you. So anyway, I just wanted to bring up the short conversation today, talking about this concept about white stress and how white stress really can be debilitating. You often don't realize you have it. You got to pay attention to that and sit there and say, am I always worrying about this? Am I always thinking about, do I check my balances daily? Or do I check my balances weekly or monthly? If you're checking it weekly or monthly, you're probably not dealing with white stress. If you're checking your balances daily and saying, oh shoot, I have $780 coming out on Tuesday. My paycheck didn't come until Wednesday. That's white stress. That means you've got a problem. And you want to do everything you can to eliminate that problem by creating those additional buffers. And again, it also brings up that concern where so many people push the theoretical concept of over leveraging yourself. And I know some people that leverage the heck out of themselves. And leverage isn't bad. I don't want to say it's a bad thing to leverage, right? A lot of times we like this white or black concept of it's this or that. There's gray area. Leverage is a gray area. Leverage can be used for good. Leverage can be a great asset. A lot of people use leverage very well. But what you cannot do is leverage yourself to the point where you're generating white stress, because when you're generating that white stress, you're going to stop effectively using that leverage for good, and you're going to start trading dollars for pennies. And when you're trading dollars for pennies, you've got a big problem, right? If you are running through your house trying to figure out how to sell a extra thing in your basement to pay your bills, you're facing white stress. And I don't care if you've got $10 million or $10. If you're to the point where you're worried about covering a payment, you're dealing with white stress. Get out of that situation. Whether, once again, you are just going down the journey for the first time and you're just starting to build some wealth and you're just trying to get yourself out of the rat race, if that's your case, you're going to feel great when you stop facing that white stress. You're going to realize that you have more time on your hands, your life is better, the world is a better place. And if you've gotten to the point where you're doing a lot better and it starts creeping back up on you, recognize it early, because the earlier you recognize that white stress creeping back up on you, the sooner you can get rid of it. And the sooner you get rid of it, the sooner you can get back on your horse and back riding high and back to generating strong long-term gains that make your life what you want to be. So hopefully that's helpful to think about it. I kind of wish somebody would have reminded me, and in fact, it's kind of funny. The only reason I realized that I was back in a white stress situation was actually because I was sitting down counseling somebody else on their personal budgets and financing. And I was describing to him the issue you face or the concerns you face with this idea of white stress. I'm like, right now you're so worried about paying your bills every month and you have no emergency fund and you have no gap and you've got these student loans, you've got house payments, you've got family stuff, and you got credit card debt, and think about how all this stuff is impacting your day-to-day stuff. And you just told me you're going to go get a job at like $8 an hour to help pay for this stuff when you've got skills that you could be, making $200 an hour doing, but you can't pay attention to $200 an hour because you're so worried about paying that $10, $20, $30, $40. And it was going through that process with him and talking to him about that made me all of a sudden realize, shoot, I'm not exempt from that. A lot of times we like to sit there and say like, look, I made it, yay, I made it to the top, I'm good, yay, life is perfect. But no matter how wealthy you are, it just presents new problems. And not that I'm, extremely wealthy, the most wealthy, that's not what I'm saying at all. But I did get out of that freak out stage. And now I realized that I was back in it for certain reasons. And but that's good, because now I can get out of it. And I'll spend a few weeks, a few months, make a few tweaks, get out of that, resecure that outer border and my financial future, financial plan, financial life, and get rid of that white stress. And when I get rid of that white stress, I can get back to being 100% highly effective in everything I'm doing, covering a whole bunch of different areas, and life should be good. So pay attention to white stress. If you're facing white stress, work to get rid of it. People don't talk about it enough. I think a lot of the other financial experts out there do not talk about the cost of white stress enough. A lot of people who talk about the benefits of leverage don't talk about the risks of white stress enough. It is real. It is not a theoretical problem. It is not this thing that doesn't really matter. It is a serious concern, and white stress will affect what you can do in life. And I think way too many Americans face white stress. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, you're dealing with white stress every day. A lot of people who are highly leveraged and on paper have a lot of money are still facing this white stress every day. And they can really see freedom by getting away from that white stress. And I think when people talk about being financially free and they talk about the freedom they feel when they're out of the rat race, that's really what they're talking about. They're talking about getting away from that white stress. They're no longer worried about the little things. They're no longer worried about day to day of watching the needle to make sure the needle doesn't move. They're out of that concern. And it's so powerful to be out of that, just so incredibly powerful, that I really hope you're not in that situation and that you don't get back in that situation. And when you do get in that situation, you recognize it like that and focus on, hey, I'm getting out of it. I'm getting out of it right now, because it is too debilitating to be dealing with that white stress on a day-to-day basis. All right. Hopefully that's a good thought for you today. Now go out there and make the impossible happen.
It's the morning drive.